I heard the candy bowl scrape across my porch at 11:43 p.m. on Halloween night, a slow, deliberate drag of ceramic against wood that made my teeth ache. I lived on a dead-end street where trick-or-treating ended hours ago. I should mention that I'd moved into the house only 3 weeks prior, a narrow, two-story colonial at the end of Berkshire Lane that the realtor had described as full of character. What she meant was old. What she didn't mention was that the previous owner had died inside, though I'd learned that detail from a neighbor 2 days after signing the papers. Heart attack, they said. Found him at the bottom of the basement stairs with his hand still gripping the railing. Natural causes, technically. But the way Mrs. Chen from next door had paused before saying natural made something in my stomach tighten. Halloween had been quiet that year. I'd bought a bag of candy out of obligation, set it in a wooden bowl on the porch, and settled in to watch old horror movies, the kind that don't scare you anymore because you've memorized every beat. By 11, the streets were empty. Parents had dragged their sugar-drunk children home. The jack-o'-lanterns had burned out. Even the teenagers who usually prowled the neighborhood looking for mischief had vanished. That's why the sound didn't make sense. I muted the television and listened. Silence pressed against the windows like something living. Then I heard scraping it again. Slower this time, more intentional. The bowl moved across wood in a way that wind couldn't cause because there was no wind. The night was still as breathless. I stood from the couch, my sock feet silent on the hardwood floor. The living room curtains were drawn, thick fabric that blocked out the streetlight's amber glow. I closed them earlier without thinking, a habit from my apartment days when ground-floor windows felt like open invitations. Now I regret it. I couldn't see what was on my porch without opening the door. The scraping stopped. I counted to 10, then 20. My hand rested on the doorknob cold brass that seemed to pull heat from my palm. Through the door's frosted glass panel, I could see the vague shape of my porch light, a yellow smear in the darkness. Nothing moved. No shadows shifted. I told myself it was a raccoon. We had them in the neighborhood, fat ones that knocked over trash cans and ate fallen crab apples. One had probably smelled the chocolate and knocked the bowl around. Completely normal, logical, but when I finally opened the door, the candy bowl sat in the exact center of the porch. 3 feet from where I'd left it near the railing, every piece of candy was gone, not scattered. Not partially eaten or torn open, just gone. The bowl was empty and clean, positioned so precisely in the middle of the weathered planks that it looked staged, placed. I stepped onto the porch, cold October air seeping through my thin t-shirt. The street was empty in both directions. Porch lights glowed in distant windows like dying stars. Not a single person in sight. I picked up the bowl and felt something gritty on the bottom. When I tilted it toward the porch light, I saw dirt. Fresh, dark soil, still slightly damp, pressed into the ceramic in the perfect shape of small handprints. Children's handprints, but they were pressed on the wrong side on the outside bottom of the bowl, as if someone had been holding it from underneath while lying on the ground. I went back inside and locked the door. Double-checked it. Then I checked all the windows on the first floor, making sure each lock was engaged. Each curtain fully closed. This was excessive, I knew. Some kid's prank, probably. Older teenagers messing with the new neighbor. But my hands were shaking as I washed the bowl in the kitchen sink, scrubbing away the soil until my fingers were pink and raw. The house settled around me with its usual creaks and groans. Old houses do that expanding and contracting with temperature changes, wood shifting in ways that sound almost like footsteps if you're not used to them. I'd learned its vocabulary over the past 3 weeks. The tick of the heating system, the rattle of pipes, the soft groan of the third step on the staircase. But at 2:14 a.m., I heard a sound I didn't recognize, scratching, soft and rhythmic, like fingernails on wood. It came from below me from the basement. I was in bed when I heard it, lying in the dark with my phone's screen washing blue light across the ceiling as I scrolled through nothing. The scratching was faint enough that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then it came again, 3 deliberate scrapes, a pause, then 3 more. The basement door was in the kitchen, a white-painted hollow core that I'd only opened once since moving in, just long enough to flip on the light and see concrete steps descending into darkness. The basement had that smell of mildew and old concrete and something sour I couldn't identify. I'd closed the door and decided I'd deal with it later. There were boxes I needed to store down there eventually, but not yet. Not until I felt more settled. I got out of bed and stood in the hallway listening. The scratching had stopped. The house was silent again, that thick, middle-of-the-night silence that feels like being underwater. I told myself to go back to bed, told myself it was pipes or the furnace or a mouse in the walls. Something normal, something explainable, but I walked down the stairs anyway, each step creaking under my weight, and crossed through the dark living room to the kitchen. The basement door was open, just slightly, maybe 3 inches. Enough that I could see the darkness beyond, a blackness that seemed thicker than the darkness around me. I knew I'd closed it. I was certain I'd closed it. I closed every door in this house, a compulsion I'd developed in my 20s after a break-in at my college apartment. Doors stayed closed. Always. I reached for the light switch beside the door frame, my finger finding the toggle in the dark through muscle memory. The fluorescent bulb in the basement ceiling flickered twice before catching, washing the concrete steps in harsh white light. Nothing there. Just steps. Just concrete. Just the smell of mildew rising up like breath. I pulled the door shut firmly, heard the latch click, and turned the small lock on the knob. It was a flimsy lock, the kind that could probably be opened with a butter knife, but it made me feel better. Then I went to the sink and poured myself a glass of water, drinking it while staring at the basement door, waiting for it to open again. It didn't. By the time I climbed back upstairs and got into bed, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd simply forgotten to close it earlier. The human mind fills in gaps, creates false memories, revises recent history to make sense of the present. I probably had left it open. Maybe I'd been distracted. Maybe I'd only thought I'd closed it. I fell asleep around 3:30, my phone still clutched in my hand. When I woke at 7:42 a.m., there was dirt on my bedroom floor. A trail of it, actually. Small clumps of dark soil leading from my doorway to the side of my bed, ending in a smudged print on the hardwood that might have been a footprint. A small one, child-sized. I sat up slowly, my heart doing something painful in my chest. The dirt was real. I could see particles of it catching the morning light slanting through my window. I could smell that organic, earthen smell that didn't belong on my second floor. I got out of bed and followed the trail backward. It led into the hallway, down the stairs, each step marked with a smudge of soil through the living room, and into the kitchen, where it stopped at the basement door, which was open again, wide open this time, pushed back against the wall. The light was still on, that fluorescent glow still buzzing. I could see the steps descending, see the concrete floor at the bottom, see the dark shapes of my few storage boxes in the corner, and I could see footprints, small prints in the dust on the basement floor, leading from the bottom of the steps to the far wall and back again. A child's feet, barefoot, the toes clearly visible in the dust. Multiple trips, the prints overlapped and crisscrossed in patterns that suggested pacing, walking back and forth. Over and over, while I was sleeping, I grabbed my phone and took pictures, my hands shaking so badly the first few shots were blurred. Then I called the police. The non-emergency line, because what was I going to report? Footprints, dirt, an open door? But the dispatcher was kind, professional, and said she'd send an officer to check it out. Officer Reyes arrived 40 minutes later. A woman in her 40s, with grey streaking her dark hair and eyes, that had seen enough that nothing surprised her anymore. She walked through my house methodically, checking windows, checking doors, examining the basement with a flashlight even though the overhead light was on. "Locks are intact," she said, climbing back up the basement steps. "No signs of forced entry. Windows are all secure." "You live alone?" "Yes. Any roommates previously? Does anyone else have keys? The realtor has a set. That's it. She nodded, made a note in her little pad. The footprints are strange, she admitted. But the doors of these old locks don't always catch properly. Could be the door's not hanging level, swings open on its own. The dirt could have been tracked in yesterday during trick-or-treating. Kids running in and out. I didn't let any kids inside. You sure? Sometimes we forget. It was a busy night, but I didn't forget. I sat on my couch alone until 11 o'clock. No one had come inside. No children had tracked dirt through my house and up my stairs and into my bedroom while I watched television with the volume up loud enough to hear every creak and footstep. Officer Reyes gave me her card and suggested I get the basement door fixed, maybe install a better lock. She said if I had any more concerns to call. She didn't say whether she believed me. She didn't have to. I could see it in the way she looked at the dirt, at the prints, at me, like she was calculating how much of this was real and how much was new house anxiety manifesting as paranoia. After she left, I cleaned, swept and vacuumed every inch of the house, scrubbed the basement floor until the footprints were gone, washed my hands until they were red. Then I went to the hardware store and bought a deadbolt for the basement door, a serious one with a key, and installed it myself, my hands still shaking as I worked the drill. The house was clean, secure, safe. I told myself that over and over as I made coffee, as I ate breakfast, as I tried to work on my laptop at the kitchen table. Just a series of coincidences. The bowl tipping over. The door is not latching. My own footprints that I'd forgotten about. The human mind creates patterns where none exist, sees threats in shadows, manufactures fear from uncertainty. But that night, at exactly 11:43 p.m., I heard the candy bowl scrape across my porch again. I hadn't put it back outside. I'd left it in the kitchen cabinet, washed and dried and shut away. But when I went to the front door and looked through the peephole, I could see my wooden bowl sitting in the center of the porch in that same precise position, empty. I didn't open the door this time. I stood with my eye pressed into the peephole, watching, waiting for movement. The street was empty. The night was still. Nothing stirred. Then slowly, the bowl began to slide. Not tipping, not rolling. Sliding, dragging across the wood in that same deliberate way, moving inch by inch toward the edge of the porch. I watched it reach the top step and tip over, tumbling down to the walkway with a hollow wooden knock that I heard through the door. And I saw what had been underneath it, a photograph, old, faded, the colors washed out to ghosts of what they'd been. I couldn't see details through the peephole, but I could see it was there, lying face up on the weathered planks where the bowl had been. I waited 5 full minutes before I opened the door, checked the street again, listened for footsteps, breathing. Any sign of someone watching? Nothing. Just November silence and the distant hum of a car on the main road 3 blocks away. The photograph was curled at the edges, damaged by moisture and time. It showed my porch, this exact porch, but from years ago. The paint was different green instead of the current grey. The railing was intact, not weathered and missing spindles like it was now. And standing on the porch, small and pale and staring directly at the camera, was a child. A girl, maybe 7 or 8, with dark hair hanging lank around a thin face. She wore a white nightgown that seemed too big for her, the hem pooling around bare feet. Her eyes were dark hollows in the faded photograph, but I could feel them looking at me across the years. On the back, in pencil that had nearly faded away, someone had written, "Emma, October 31st, 1987, 36 years ago." I took the photograph inside and locked the door. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Something had shifted in my chest, that initial fear hardening into something else, determination maybe, or just the need to understand what was happening to me, to my house, to my life that had been normal 3 weeks ago. I spent the next 2 hours on my laptop, searching property records, historical archives and newspaper databases. The house had been built in 1923. It had changed hands 17 times before I'd bought it. The previous owner, Richard Chen, the man who died at the bottom of the basement stairs, had lived here for 43 years. Before him, it was a rental property for nearly a decade. Before that, a family named Sullivan. Before that, names that blurred together across decades of records that were poorly digitized or missing entirely. But I found her, Emma Sullivan, age 8, reported missing on November 1st, 1987. The article was brief, buried in the archives of the local newspaper. Emma Sullivan, daughter of Robert and Linda Sullivan of Berkshire Lane, was reported missing Saturday morning when she failed to wake for breakfast. Police are investigating but have no suspects at this time. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Sheriff's Department. There were no follow-up articles, no resolution, just that single paragraph. And then, silence. Emma Sullivan had disappeared from this house on Halloween night 36 years ago, and no one had ever found her. I set my laptop aside and looked at the photograph again, at that small, pale figure in her too large nightgown. In the darkness where her eyes should be, she stood perfectly still, as if she'd been holding that pose for a very long time before the shutter clicked. The house settled around me, that same creak of old wood, that same tick of cooling pipes, normal sounds, familiar sounds, except now I knew they weren't alone. The scratching started again at 2:14 a.m. exactly, like something was keeping time, following a schedule that transcended decades. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I heard it, the photograph in front of me, a cold cup of coffee in my hands. 3 scrapes. Pause. 3 from the basement. The new deadbolt was still locked, the key in my pocket. But the scratching was clear, deliberate, impossible to dismiss as pipes or house settling or imagination. It was fingernails on wood. It was intentional. It was a message. I unlocked the deadbolt. My hand was steady as I turned the key, as I twisted the knob, as I pulled the door open and looked down into the basement. The fluorescent light was off. I didn't remember turning it off. Below me was darkness, complete and absolute, the kind of black that seems to absorb light rather than just reflect its absence. The scratching stopped. Emma. My voice sounded small in the dark house, childlike. Is that you? Silence. Then, from the darkness below, a sound I hadn't expected. Crying. Soft, muffled, the sound of a child trying to cry quietly, trying not to be heard. It came from the far corner of the basement, from behind my storage boxes, from a place I hadn't looked closely at because I hadn't wanted to go down there, hadn't wanted to spend time in that dark space that smelled wrong. I flipped the light switch. The fluorescent bulb flickered, buzzed, and stayed dark. Dead, even though it had worked fine that morning when Officer Reyes had been here. I used my phone instead, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as I descended the stairs. Each step felt like a choice I was making and couldn't unmake. Each step took me further from the door, from safety, from the logical world where basements were just basements and houses were just houses. The concrete floor was cold through my socks. My breath came out in small clouds when it had gotten so cold. The crying had stopped, but I could feel something in the darkness beyond my phone's light. A presence, a weight. The air felt thick, resistant, like moving through water. The storage boxes were stacked against the far wall, and behind them was another door. No, not a door. A section of the wall that had been bricked up, then partially torn down. Old bricks lay in a pile on the floor, mortar dust white against the concrete. The hole in the wall was maybe 3 feet high, 2 feet wide, big enough for a child to crawl through, big enough for something to crawl out. I knelt in front of the hole and shone my light inside. The beam disappeared into darkness that seemed to go back when it should, further than the house's foundation should allow. The air coming from the hole was cold and damp, and carried that smell, the sour smell I'd noticed that first day, stronger now, almost overwhelming. Earth, fresh-turned earth, grave dirt, and I could see something pale in the darkness, small, air-huddled. Emma. The shape moved. Not toward me, but shifting, turning that white fabric, catching my light. The nightgown. She was wearing the nightgown from the photograph, and it was too big for her. And she was so small in that darkness, so impossibly small. Emma, are you trapped? Do you need help? Her face turned toward my light, and I saw her eyes. Not hollow. Not dark, just eyes. A child's eyes, wide and frightened and full of something that made my chest ache. He said I was playing a game, she whispered. Her voice was thin, unused, like vocal cords that hadn't worked properly in decades. Hide and seek. He said to hide down here and he'd come find me. Who said that? The man? The man who lived here? She hugged her knees tighter. But he never came to find me. And I can't remember how to get out. I've been looking for the door, but I keep getting lost, and it's so dark, and I'm so cold. My hands were trembling again. The phone shook in my grip. The light dancing across that pale face, those dark eyes, that too large nightgown. Emma, you need to come out. Your parents, they're not here anymore. She said it simply, factually. They left. Everyone leaves. They always leave. I won't leave. I live here now. I can help you. She tilted her head, studying me with those ancient child eyes. Can you? No one else could. They all heard me. They all knew I was here, but they never helped. They just left. 17 owners since 1923. How many had heard scratching in the night? How many had seen dirt on their floors, found doors open, felt cold air rising from the basement? How many had told themselves it was nothing, just an old house settling, just their imagination, just anything but what it actually was? A child, trapped, alone, for 36 years. Come out, I said, extending my hand toward the hole. Please, let me help you. Emma looked at my hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she began to crawl forward. Her movements were wrong, too fluid, too boneless, like something that had forgotten how bodies work. The nightgown dragged behind her, collecting dust and cobwebs. She reached the edge of the hole, and her hand was cold. So cold it burned. So cold, my fingers went numb instantly, but I held on, pulling gently, helping her crawl out onto the basement floor. She was light, impossibly light, like pulling on fabric with nothing inside, but she was there. Standing in front of me in her dirty nightgown, bare feet on concrete, dark hair hanging around her face. Real, solid, a child who'd been missing for 36 years. Standing in my basement, thank you, she whispered. Then the light on my phone went out. Complete darkness. The kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face, can't orient yourself, can't tell which way is up. I fumbled with my phone, trying to turn the flashlight back on, my numb fingers clumsy on the screen. The crying started again, but not from Emma, from everywhere. From the walls, from the ceiling, from the hole in the wall. Multiple voices overlapping, all crying in that same muffled way. Children crying. How many? How many had been down here? How many had played hide and seek and never been found? My phone light finally came back on. And Emma was gone, but the basement wasn't empty. They stood against the walls, small figures in various states of decay and darkness. Some were solid, some were transparent. Some wore clothes I recognized from old photographs, fashions from decades ago. Others wore nothing but shadows, children, dozens of them, all staring at me with eyes that held years of darkness and waiting and hope that had curdled into something else. And at the back, standing near the stairs, was a man, older, grey hair, glasses, cardigan, sweater. He looked normal, grandfatherly, except for the expression on his face, except for the way he smiled at me. You let her out, he said, not angry, almost pleased. The others never did. They heard them, they knew they were here, but they never looked, never helped, never opened the door. I recognized him from the photo Mrs. Chen had shown me when I'd asked about the previous owner. Richard Chen, the man who died at the bottom of the basement stairs, except he wasn't dead. Or he was, but he was still here, standing between me and the stairs. They're mine, he said softly. I found them. I taught them how to hide. I played with them. They're supposed to stay. You killed them. I helped them. His smile widened. They were lost, alone. I gave them somewhere to belong. I took care of them. The children around me hadn't moved. They watched our conversation with those hollow eyes like spectators at a play they'd seen performed too many times. Emma, I said, not taking my eyes off Richard Chen. Emma, where are you? Here. Her voice came from behind me, from the hole in the wall. I'm always here. We're all always here. That's the rule. There's no rule, I said. You can leave. You can all leave. Richard Chen's expression changed. The smile faded. No, he said firmly. No, they can't. This is their home. This is where they belong. Where they're safe. Where I can take care of them. You murdered them. I saved them. He took a step toward me. And now you've seen them. So you have to choose what? Stay or go. If you stay, you can help me take care of them. If you go, he gestured to the children around us. Well, they get lonely, and they don't like being abandoned. Not again. I looked at the faces surrounding me. Children from different decades, different lives, all trapped in this basement by a man who'd played hide and seek and never counted to 10, all waiting for someone to find them, except I had found them. And unlike the 17 previous owners, I hadn't ignored the signs, hadn't dismissed the sounds, hadn't run. I choose something different, I said. I ran for the stairs. Richard Chen moved to block me, but he was just a ghost, just a memory, and I passed through him like smoke. The cold burned, my chest seized, but I made it to the stairs and took them 2 at a time. Behind me, the children began to scream, not in anger, but in fear, in desperation, the sound of people watching their last hope escape. I burst through the basement door into the kitchen and slammed it behind me. No lock would hold them. No deadbolt would keep them in. But I didn't need to lock them in. I needed to let them out. I grabbed my phone and called 911. A real emergency this time. Told the dispatcher there were bodies in my basement. Human remains, children, behind a bricked-up wall. The dispatcher tried to calm me down, tried to get details, but I just kept repeating the address until she confirmed units were on the way. Then I opened the basement door and turned on every light in the house. The children were on the stairs, all of them, climbing slowly, hesitantly, like they weren't sure they were allowed. Emma was in front, her hand on the railing, looking up at me with those dark eyes. You called someone, she said. Yes. They'll find us. Yes. What happens then? I didn't know. I didn't know what happened when ghosts got justice, when murders got solved decades too late, when children who'd been hidden away finally got found. But it had to be better than this. Had to be better than an eternity in a dark basement playing a game that never ended. You get to go home, I told her. Your real home, Emma smiled. It was small and sad and full of something that might have been hope. Behind her, the other children began to climb. They passed by me one by one, their cold presence raising goosebumps on my arms, and they didn't stop at the kitchen. They continued through the house, to the front door, which swung open on its own. Outside, the street was still dark, still empty. But as each child crossed the threshold, they faded, not disappearing but becoming less solid, less trapped, less here, until only Emma remained. She stood in my doorway looking back at me. Thank you, she said again, for finding us. Then she was gone. The police found 11 bodies behind the basement wall. Children ranging from ages 6 to 10, buried in the earth beneath the house's foundation, some of them dating back to the 1950s. Richard Chen had lived in the house for 43 years, long enough to perfect his game, long enough to ensure no one would think to look behind a bricked-up wall in a basement that smelled wrong. The investigation made national news. The previous owners were interviewed. Many of them admitted to hearing sounds, seeing things and feeling uncomfortable, but they'd convinced themselves it was nothing, just an old house. Just their imagination, just easier to ignore than to investigate. I moved out 3 days later. I couldn't stay in a house where children had died, where a man had played his sick games, where the walls had absorbed decades of terror. The house was condemned eventually, torn down after the investigation concluded. The lot sits empty now, just grass and a memorial stone with 11 names carved into granite. But I kept the photograph, Emma Sullivan. October 31st, 1987, standing on a porch in her too large nightgown, staring at a camera held by a man who'd already decided she would never see November. I keep it in my apartment, in a frame on my bookshelf, because someone needs to remember her. Someone needs to acknowledge what happened. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear scratching, not in my apartment, not in my walls, but somewhere distant, like an echo from another place, another time. 3 scrapes, pause, 3 scrapes. I tell myself it's just a memory, just trauma manifesting as phantom sounds, just my brain trying to make sense of what I experienced. But I also tell myself that maybe Emma is trying to tell me something, that maybe there are other houses, other basements, other children still waiting to be found, still playing a game they don't know how to end. So I listen in the dark, in the silence between heartbeats, in the spaces where the living world touches something older and colder and more patient than we can imagine. And I wonder how many other houses have doors that won't stay closed, have dirt appearing in impossible places, and have small footprints in the dust. I wonder how many people hear scratching in the night and tell themselves it's nothing. How many convince themselves that old houses just make sounds. How many choose not to see, because that's the real horror, isn't it? Not what's waiting in the darkness, but what we're willing to ignore, what we're willing to leave unfound. The children we abandon because acknowledging them would be too difficult, too frightening, too inconvenient. Emma Sullivan went missing on Halloween night 36 years ago, and she waited. She scratched at the walls and left dirt on floors and moved candy bowls across porches, and she waited for someone to notice, for someone to care enough to look. I still don't know why I did it. Why didn't I dismiss the signs like the 17 owners before me? Why did I open that door and go down those stairs and look into that hole in the wall? Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was fate. Maybe Emma chose me somehow, recognized something in me that the others didn't have. Or maybe I was just the first person too stubborn to ignore the truth. I moved into a modern apartment building after that. All steel and glass and open floor plans. No basement, no attic, nothing below me but a parking garage. Nothing above me but an elderly couple who watch game shows at excessive volume. Safe, normal, boring, but I still hear the scratching sometimes. Still find dirt where there shouldn't be any. I still wake up at 2:14 a.m. to the sound of children crying in the distance, and I've learned to listen, not to dismiss it, not to explain it away, because somewhere, in some house at the end of some quiet street, there might be another child waiting. Another Emma who's been playing hide and seek for far too long. Another small voice crying in a darkness that has forgotten what light looks like. The bowl is still in my cabinet. I cleaned it thoroughly, scrubbed away every trace of soil and memory. But sometimes late at night I take it out and hold it, run my fingers across the ceramic, feel the weight of it, and I think about what was underneath a photograph. A message. A child reaching across decades for someone to notice. I noticed. I can't unknow what I know now. Can't unsee what I've seen. The world is thinner than we think, the boundary between past and present more permeable than we'd like to believe. And the dead don't always rest, especially when no one ever looks for them. Especially when their only grave was a hole in a basement wall in a house full of people who chose not to hear them scream. I did hear them. I found them. I helped them. But I wonder, in the dark hours before dawn, if that was enough. If finding 11 is enough when there might be hundreds, thousands, children buried in basements and crawl spaces and hidden rooms all across the country, all across the world, all waiting for someone to notice the scratching, all waiting for someone to look. I looked, and now I can't stop looking. Every old house I pass, I wonder. Every basement door that won't stay closed, every cold spot in a rental apartment, every landlord who mentions just a settling sound. Nothing to worry about, I wonder. And sometimes, late at night, I take walks through old neighborhoods. I look at the houses with their warm windows and neat lawns and closed doors. I look for the signs, the overgrown yards that suggest no one wants to stay long, the for sale signs that appear and disappear with suspicious frequency, the buildings that seem darker than they should, even with every light turned on. I look for the places where children might be waiting. I don't know what I'll do if I find one. Call the police? Break down the door? Walk away like all the others? I tell myself I'll never walk away, but I also remember how cold Emma's hand was when I helped her out of that hole, how her eyes looked when she said, "They always leave." I wonder if that's what I did. If by moving out, by tearing down the house, by ending the game, I abandoned them in some way. If they needed more than just being found. If they needed someone to stay, the scratching happens most often on Halloween now. Every October 31st at 11:43 p.m. I hear it. A soft scraping sound that comes from no particular direction. 3 scrapes, pause, 3 scrapes. I've stopped trying to locate the source. I just listen, and I remember Emma Sullivan, age 8, who disappeared on Halloween night and spent 36 years hiding in a basement, waiting for someone to find her. I remember all the children I found, all the small bodies that hadn't been given names or funerals or justice until someone finally looked behind the wall. And I wonder how many are still waiting, still playing, still hoping that this time someone will actually come find them. The next time you hear scratching in the night, don't dismiss it. Don't tell yourself it's pipes or house settling or imagination. Listen carefully to the rhythm, to the intentionality, to the desperation underneath the sound, because somewhere, in some darkness, a child might be trying to tell you something, and they've been waiting so very long for someone to hear.